UFO contact from planet Ummo 14 light-years away, a perfect case? Two separate photographers unknown to each other took pictures of the Ummo ship who had landed and left tripod landing marks. This happened when the Ummo group left Earth at this time when they were afraid of an possible upcoming atomic war. A case with a high level. On the technical information given from Ummo, a civilization in the first steps of interplanetary crossing through space. Because this text is scanned, there may be some wrong spelled words. Introduction. Are there extraterrestrial beings living among us on Earth? Events surrounding two spectacular Spanish UFO sightings suggest that this case is a fact. The Ummo case is a mystery with plenty of clues along the trail. Whatever the truth, this is in every way a refreshing change from the more usual alleged encounters with people from other worlds, as the Ummites themselves explained. We have not come to bring you a new doctrine, as prophets descending from the skies to teach a new physics or mathematics or preach a new religion, or offering you panaceas for your social or patho-psychological ills. Apparently, in 1950, inhabitants of the planet Ummo, 14 light-years away, landed on Earth. They lived among us for 55 years undetected, establishing their bases and acclimating themselves to our way of life. Then, in 1965, they started to make contact. Initially, they compiled a list of 20 carefully selected individuals, most of them were Spanish. They included a playwright, a police officer, an employee in the American Embassy in Madrid, an engineer, an official of the telegraph office, a lawyer, and two of Spain's best-known ufologists, Antonio Ribera and Rafael Farials. Many of those on the list were also members of a small Spanish group, the Society of Friends of Space, including their founder-president, Fernando Sims. According to the Ummites, those on this particular list constitute the Madrid group. There are other groups all over the world. Early in 1965, the Ummites began to contact the names on their Madrid list, by letter or telephone, to explain the purpose of their mission to Earth. One of the few who has openly described what happened is the engineer Enrique Villagrasa Novoa, who received the telephone call late at night on the 28th of November 1966. The speaker identified himself as an extraterrestrial being and spoke fluently and intelligently, though in a voice that was both faintly foreign and mechanical, for about 2 hours. He discussed engineering and obviously had an impressively detailed knowledge of the subject. He followed this up by posting on some documents a few days later. Unfortunately, few of those on the Ummites list have revealed the details of how they were contacted. It seems the letters were usually typewritten on paper that bore a distinctive mark. Nor do they know how many others the Ummites telephoned, nor whether they contacted anyone more than once. All we know is that some of those who had a specialist interest received follow-up documents. One of the problems that besets this story is that there has been very little investigation into vital points. For example, no one seems to have made any detailed, systematic attempt to look into the ways in which the Ummites contacted the people on their list, nor why these people should be on the list. In 1969, the Ummites contacted a prominent UFO researcher, Antonio Ribera, who had in fact heard about them 2 years earlier when he had been introduced to Villagrasa. Rather curiously, he kept the matter quiet, and is only in 1975, 8 years after first hearing about it and 6 years after being contacted by the Ummites, that he spoke out. The Ummites suggested to Ribera that their planet may orbit the star we know as Wolf 424. Apparently, it's difficult for them to be more precise than this because our astronomical references are incompatible with theirs. They claimed that in 1948 they had accidentally picked up a strange radio signal with a frequency of 413.44 megacycles, which they were unable to decipher. Eventually, they traced it to a planet known to them as Uyaga, or Cold Star of Quadrate. They refer to our Sun as Quadrate. The signal was later identified as having been transmitted by a Norwegian scientific research vessel. The transmission took place between 5 and 7 February 1934, and took 14 years to travel to Ummo. Subsequent investigation confirmed the presence of such a ship, transmitting on this frequency, between these dates. The Ummites were surprised at this evidence of intelligent life on our planet and decided to investigate. 2 years later, in March 1950, a lenticular-shaped spaceship landed secretly near the small town of Le Havre in Les Masses Alpes, France, in a wild and sparsely populated region, well suited to their purposes. The landing went unobserved, and a party of 4 males and 2 females was left on Earth. They took over a nearby country house, paying its owners to leave, and excavated an underground hiding place as their base. When the story eventually became public knowledge, it is said that the French authorities carried out an official investigation of the alleged landing area. Some reports claim that they found evidence of unusual activity. During their early years on Earth, the Ummites had some difficulty in adjusting to conditions here. In the spring of 1967, an announcement was made that an Ummo spaceship would land as a Madrid suburb on the 1st of June of that year. A number of people living in Madrid were contacted by letter and telephone, allegedly by Ummites now living on Earth, the Ummo spaceship. They said, would take some of the humans back with it to Ummo. At 8:20 p.m. on the 1st of June the spaceship duly appeared. Marked with a symbol that had appeared on a thumbprint seal on some of she letters, it was photographed by an anonymous witness and, independently by one Antonio Pardo. Though broadly similar to us physiologically, there were certain differences, one of the most marked being that their fingers were so sensitive to light and other forms of radiation that they initially found it very awkward to use, for example, lift buttons and electric light switches. Unfortunately, our information about the Ummites is restricted to what they have chosen to tell us, so that our knowledge of their affairs is very patchy. Consequently, all we know about the Ummites' first 55 years on Earth is that they acquired a great deal of information about us and established a secure base for themselves. They certainly were not in any hurry to make themselves known, and when they did so it was not to any government but to selected individuals, and even then they did not go out of their way to provide incontrovertible proof as to their supposed identity. They explained the reason for their apparent lack of zeal, ver. Some of you keep saying that we must give you proof. We continue to repeat, until you are tired of hearing, that we are not concerned whether or not you believe us. We can operate much more effectively in anonymity, and we are not going to be so naive as to introduce ourselves to you openly simply to satisfy your need for proof. Their communications were limited to information about themselves and their planet, their way of life and their culture, all very informative, but nothing that could be verified. But then, in the spring of 1967, the Ummites told 3 of their contacts that on 5 June an Ummite spacecraft would land just outside Madrid, pick some of them up and take them back to Ummo. They indicated the approximate landing site. UFO shoot. The bizarre announcement appeared in the Spanish newspaper Informaciones. On 20 May 1967, and several members of the Madrid group went armed with cameras to try to photograph the spacecraft. And on 5 June, at 8:20 p.m., as predicted, an Ummite spacecraft was seen by scores of witnesses. But the evidence that should have proved that the Ummites were who they claimed to be, simply confused many people when it became known that there had been a sighting 6 months earlier in the same area, similar in many ways to the 5 June sighting. Why, they argued, had not the Ummites announced this sighting beforehand too? The earlier sighting occurred on 6 February 1966 in the suburb of Aluche to the southwest of Madrid. Between 8 and 9 p.m. an orange-colored disc-shaped UFO had made a brief landing on a farm near an airfield. It was seen by a large number of witnesses, including a group of soldiers, a man named Vincent Ortuno who, from his 6th-floor apartment, saw it both land and take off, and a housewife who declared she saw a giant eye looking at her. The most important witness, though, was a motorist named José Luis Jordan who saw the object from his car. He stopped to get out and take a better look, then drove onto where he thought it had landed. As he approached, it rose quickly, but he was able to give a detailed account of what he saw. The craft was luminous, colored, and 33 to 39 feet, 10 to 12 meters, in diameter, giving out a steady, muted, vibratory sound. Beneath it were 3 projections resembling landing gear, and a curious marking, something like the letter H. Marks were later found in the area where Jordan had seen the landing, and a photograph of them appeared in Informaciones. The predicted UFO was seen in near-daylight conditions, a little after sunset, in 3 separate locations in the southwest suburbs of Madrid. The first sightings were over the open grounds. Shortly afterwards, a Spanish ufologue named Manus Leggett published a book which he requested additional information on the San Jose sighting. On the 26th of August received a letter from a man signing him Antonio Pardo, who described how his family had been in the area on the 5th of June, had seen not only the UFO but also a young man taking photographs of it. Antonio Pardo also had his camera with him and he too took photographs of the UFO. Alas, in excitement he forgot to take off the lens cap when he took the first 2 pictures. Nonetheless, he did end up with 7 clear pictures, 2 of which he sent to Leggett. They were very similar to those taken by the anonym young man. On the landing site they found strange tubes, the site of the Madrid landing of the 1st of June 1967. The tubes, which were around 5 inches, 5 centimeters long, were filled with a liquid that escaped and evaporated on opening and also contained 2 mysterious strips of green plastic bearing the characteristic Ummo symbol. It is the hope that this important evidence might be of extraterrestrial origin. One of the tubes, together with its plastic strips, was subjected to laboratory analysis. It turned out that the tube was made of high-purity nickel, while the plastic was polyvinyl fluoride. The Ummo affair is riddled with doubtful aspects. While its supporters argue that it involves more contact with extraterrestrials than any other case before, it appears that the most contact anyone actually had was just a single telephone call. However, there may have been one exception. Between 1967 and 1975, the members of the Madrid group received a letter from a man who claimed to be the Ummites typist. Apparently, he had advertised for work in a newspaper and had subsequently been visited by 2 tall, fair-haired, respectable-dressed men. They told him that they were Danish doctors and asked if he could type out scientific material for them on a regular basis. Initially all went well, until the day he read the following sentence: "We come from a celestial body named Ummo which is 14.6 light-years from the Earth." He took this at its face value and questioned the doctors. Eventually they admitted that they were not Danish doctors at all, but extraterrestrial visitors. To prove their identity they produced a tiny sphere just an inch or so in diameter, which one of them placed in midair before the typist. He looked into it and to his amazement saw a scene that had taken place in that same office on the preceding day when his wife, fearing that the Danish doctors might be spies, a diagram of an Ummite spaceship allegedly supplied by the Ummites themselves. The ship, which the Ummites call Owawolea Uewa M, is apparently powered by a mixture of bismuth and lithium, which is, to say the least, remarkable for a vessel capable of negotiating the perils of interstellar space. Telepathic communication. The most significant physical difference between ourselves and the Ummites is that, during their puberty, both sexes' vocal cords are so severely affected that speech becomes impossible. Adults therefore communicate by telepathy. The group sent to Earth was selected from the few exceptional individuals who remain immune to this impediment, tailfail. Other minor differences include the Ummites' sense of smell, which is so highly developed that they made an art form out of blending perfumes together so cleverly that we, unfortunately, cannot appreciate these delightful subtle effects. The Ummites also claim that our understanding of physics is woefully, bedrovlig, simple. Although our physicists are starting to research into the 4th dimension, this is child's play to the Ummites, who make practical use of at least 10 dimensions and are aware of many more. They also believe that the subatomic particles that our physicists are continually discovering are illusions. Apparently, these phenomena result from the different positions of the three axes that comprise what the Ummites call Ibozu-UU, their model of the fundamental physical particle. Les om det på norsk I, en alternative cosmologie, and Tor Alfstad. The Ummo scripts contain a wealth of such stimulating ideas it certainly sounds impressive enough. But nothing has been substantiated in science on Earth yet. But how long have the scientific ideas been active here on Earth? Take, for example, their ingenious account of how they are able to take advantage of certain aspects of space, which we know nothing of, using folds and warps in the continuum to reduce enormous distances to manageable journeys. According to the ufologist Antonio Ribera, he has seen blueprints of number of useful devices provided by members of the Madrid group. They include a new type of altimeter, a sound recorder with no moving parts and, most impressive of all, computers based on titanium crystals that store information at the atomic level. These devices have enabled the Ummites, while on Earth, to collect and store information on most aspects of our civilization. Apparently, this has been dispatched to Ummo. If the vocabulary of the Ummites is unconvincing, their sentence construction is totally ludicrous. Take, for example, this sentence do Ummo do Ummo do, which is supposed to mean we have come from Ummo and we arrived with our vessel in the south of France. Clearly, it cannot be translated word for word. So presumable its meaning is contained it, the combination of sounds, just as the different arrangements of dots and dashes in the Morse code or the binary code of a computer encapsulate significant information. They used titanium, an immensely tight and strong metal used extensively on Earth, in structural parts of high-speed aeroplanes such as the Anglo-French supersonic Concorde. The Ummites, however, apparently use titanium, in crystal form, to store information at the atomic level in their computer systems. Another interesting thing. A professor in the Faculty of Medicine at Madrid University allegedly received through the post a small cube that was smooth, black and metallic on all sides but one. The remaining side had a translucent screen. Accompanying instructions told him to speak a certain sequence of vowels upon which the whole screen lit up and the professor saw a live specimen of a nerve cell. It is said that the professor filmed the entire incident, but his name has been withheld. And the whereabouts of the film is unknown. See they who overweave, the children of men's evolution don't let too good evidence come out because man shall learn to think, the universal logic, in his own mind, independent of what others say, and in this manner understand himself, as a cosmic being. Duality is a theme appearing frequently in the Ummites' documents. In this one Ummo report the information was much more precise. We read therein. 1. The atomic structure of the two universes differ in the sign of the electrical charge. 2. In our twin cosmos there does not exist the same number of galaxies, and those which are in it do not have the same structures. 3. The two cosmoses possess the same mass and the same radius of curvature corresponding to a hypersphere of negative curvature. 4. The two cosmoses were created simultaneously, but their arrows of time should not be considered as pointing in the same direction. 5. Our twin cosmos exerts its influence on our own cosmos. It is the asymmetry of this influence which has shown us that our twin cosmos has another distribution of galaxies. 6. The two cosmoses were born of a double explosion implosion. WAAM and UWAAM are two joined universes that can never be located because they are not separated by space. They mutually influence each other. See pictures in this matter from UFO contact from Koldas on this same website. 7. The galaxies are now moving at an almost constant velocity. 8. It seems logical that if the galaxies are not being moved by a force field, then they are moving by inertia at a uniform velocity, taking into account that they come from an initial explosion of the universe. 9. Our measuring devices are not very precise, otherwise they would have observed a shift of hands toward the red, which is not a constant but a non-sinusoidal periodic function of almost imperceptible average amplitude but nevertheless detectable. 10. The interferences prevent the galaxies from moving at a uniform velocity. 11. For this reason your measurement of the age of the universe is incorrect. 12. Our twin universe is ENANTIMORPHOUS. These 12 statements constitute a sort of puzzle, which has been studied by the above-mentioned specialists. The information is truly rich and precise, which cannot be said of the IBOZOOUU. This specialist has tried to find possible contradictions in these propositions. The first that presented itself was, into what context can the problem be placed? The text alludes specifically to curvatures, which suggests reverting to the theory of varieties, that is, to those curved spaces which are the point of departure of general classical relativity. This is another astounding confirmation of alleged realities not yet accepted by Earth sciences. The first 7 statements above plus new beer 11 were clearly enunciated, though in slightly different terms, at least 2 other space-traveling extraterrestrial races, and we have evidence of even more, visiting here at this time. Both of these other ET groups have likewise maintained extensive contact and carried on long technical dialogues on and off with Earth contactees in several different countries on this planet. Both say they have operational bases on Earth, are entirely human-looking, and move freely in our society. Both have evacuated all of their people from this planet in times of great danger, the crises being the same ones for all, and both have resumed contact when the danger is past. As this is being translated, we are in another danger crisis and all have again evacuated their people. The Pleiadians seems to have far more advanced spaceships with FRX. Self-repairing skin or covering on their ships and almost instant communication over galactic distances. Their methods in traveling is very developed as they change dimension for hyperspace jumps, traveling at displacements far exceeding that of light, and normally use many more dimensional frames of reference than we. They have marvelous, intelligent computers that can process and store information at subatomic level. They have 3D and more imaging apparatus that can penetrate all things, and can reproduce image data many forms. They are fully aware of all our sciences, philosophies, histories, and they have difficulty communicating ideas to us for lack of language concepts on Earth. They are in touch with, and coordinate, with, another space-traveling society from an opposite, counterpart universe having a reversal of dimensions, the doll universe as they call it. The modern phase of this contacts has been going on since 1964 and 1975. More info in UFO contact from the Pleiades og på norsk på the base of Rune Overby, on the same website. The Coldasians also have marvelous self-repairing spaceships, instant communication over galactic distances and through the universe barrier. Decom.via, Energiplan 2 og 3 inches som det benevnes INALTERNATIVKOSMOLOGI Avenue Tor Alfstad se utdrag fra den INNYTIDSALDERS Fodsel på Herverande webside. The Coldasians also have marvelous self-repairing spaceships, instant communication over galactic distances and through the universe barrier. They normally use many more dimensions of reality than we are even aware of, travel at displacements far exceeding light velocities, have super-intelligent super-miniaturized computers, and more imaging apparatus that can penetrate all surfaces and reproduce data in many ways. They are fully cognizant of our sciences, history, philosophy and current affairs in our world. They have difficulty communicating many ideas to us for lack of language. They in touch with other space-traveling races visiting Earth. They make extensive use of magnetic energy in all universes, and have problems with communication and traveling when sun storms occur on Earth. But such problems were never mentioned as making any difficulty for the Pleiadians from Era, Semjace's homeworld, but these ETs from Koldas say they originate in another universe for which we are their counterpart or anti-universe. The modern phase of these contacts has been going on since 1960. Both of these ET visitors operate as freely under oceans as in air. Neither have heard of the other, or at least they don't tell it, nor of the Ummo contacts, nor have the Ummos mentioned them. One peculiarity is that all three speak of intergalactic travel as though it were normal. It is the Pleiadians who claim being here longest. They say they are our forefathers, ancestors. The Mysterious Ummo Affair Part 1. Of Antonio Ribera. Translation from the Spanish by Gordon Creighton. The first page of the first English-language review on Ummo. Notice that the Ummites initiated their early Spanish contacts with Fernando Sesma, an accepted mystic. It is now fairly apparent that this was entirely in keeping with their avowed policy of not wanting to be popularly acclaimed for what they were. It did not serve their purpose at all to be identified as extraterrestrial visitors and be believed. In the spring of 1967, at my home in Barcelona, I received a telephone call from an unknown gentleman who said his name was Julian Delgado, said he was from Madrid, and said he desired very much to meet me in order to talk of a matter of the greatest interest. We arranged to meet at a centrally located café here in Barcelona, the capital of Catalunya, namely the Bar Casp, in the Galeries Condal, and it was there that I made the acquaintance of my unknown caller. He turned out to be a young man of pleasant appearance and somewhat nervous manner who, so he told me, came to Barcelona frequently in connection with his business activities. Señor Delgado said he had turned to me because he knew my name already thanks to my book El Gran Enigma de los Platillos Volantes, one, and because the matter he was going to disclose to me was connected with that subject. Then he went on to tell me about a friend of his, Don Enrique Villagrasa Novoa, a civilian construction engineer engaged in public works who, like himself, was a resident of Madrid and who, as he told me, had had lengthy conversations with extraterrestrial beings who telephoned him at his home and offered to send him reports on technical subjects to be indicated to them by him, Señor Villagrasa. Then, a few days later, Villagrasa would receive by post the report for which he had asked, typewritten on folio-size sheets, each page bearing a curious seal marked with a thumbprint and showing an H-shaped form with curving arms with a shorter vertical bar intersecting the horizontal bar of the H. In fact, it resembled the alchemical symbol for Uranus. And thus it was that I came in contact with the disconcerting, irritating, and mysterious business of Ummo, which is still going on, in 75, and which I am still very far from having got to the bottom of. But let us take it as it developed. Gradually I began to gather together the various parts of what was to become a complicated puzzle, and before me there arose this initial picture of the problem. Since about 1965, 50 it appeared, a group of some 20 or so persons, the majority of whom lived in Madrid, with one in Valencia, two in Barcelona, and possibly one more in Bilbao, had been receiving the enigmatic, Ummo reports through the post. From what my valued friend and collaborator Rafael Ferrials and I could ascertain, this group turned out to be a cross-section of the population of Spain, in which were represented people who for the most part were engaged in liberal activities, a well-known playwright, an engineer, a young lady employed in the American Embassy, an official of the Telegraph Department known for his interest in extraterrestrial studies, a lawyer, etc. Subsequently Rafael Ferrials and I myself also received communications from Ummo. The San Jose de Valderas UFO photographs. Rafael Ferrials and I investigated in due course some UFO sightings which occurred in Madrid on February 6, 1966, and June 10, 1967, and which would eventually result in our book, written in collaboration and entitled Un Caso Perfecto. The disconcerting thing about it all was that, several days beforehand, the mysterious gentleman from Ummo had announced to 3 of their Madrid correspondents the arrival of the machine scheduled for June 10, 1967, and even gave, with striking accuracy, the geographical coordinates for the spot where it would land. About 40 people, present at a gathering in the Gaffer, León, where they were wont to meet to hear Professor Fernando Sesma, president of the Society of the Friends of Space, gave their written confirmations that, on the evening before the day on which the landing took place, they had already read the announcement of its forthcoming arrival. Rafael Farials, who has now become the leading specialist in the world on the Ummo question, still has in his files the original paper bearing this important declaration. This, plus the fact that the craft which performed evolutions in the sky over the Madrid suburban estate of San José de Valderas and landed briefly in the estate of Santa Monica on the day in question June 10, 1967, displayed upon its belly a symbol most closely resembling the emblem used to authenticate the Ummo documents, establishes between both these sets of events a link which would seem to be indissoluble. Fernando Sesma and the reports, using the dozens of reports which he had received from 1965 onwards. Professor Sesma published, in 1967, a book entitled Ummo, Otro Planeta Habitado. The fact that it should have been Fernando Sesma who first divulged the disconcerting Ummo affair in printed form did not exactly contribute towards conferring a character of verisimilitude upon the business. Far be it for me to wish to reproach Fernando Sesma, but what is absolutely certain about him is that he has the reputation of being a man of fantasy given to speculations without much real basis, already expounded by him in earlier articles and books, such as the one entitled Sensational. The Extraterrestrials Speak, Rereations and Teachings from Men of Other Planets, also published by Editorial Espejo. The result of all this was that the public held Sesma's little book on Ummo to be a product of pure fantasy from Sesma's own head. Yet the fact remained that, as Farrells and I were later able to verify, Sesma merely confused himself to reproducing the reports and the drawings, some of these truly very curious, that he had been receiving from the Ummites. That this was so was proved by Farials, without leaving any room for doubt when, on one of his recent visits to Madrid, Lai managed to get Sesma to hand over to him all the precious originals, a whole bulky trunk suitcase full of them. Sesma admitted to Farials that the Ummites had now ceased to interest him much, since they represented an excessively technological civilization. His present preferences, he explained, were inclined towards the inhabitants of Alco, a planet which, so he, Sesma, explained, was on a much higher spiritual plane. Incredible telephone conversations. Enrique Villagrasa, a charming man with whom Farials and I soon became very good friends, gave us a detailed account of his own first telephonic conversation with a man from Ummo. This took place on November 28, 1966, and the conversation lasted almost exactly 2 hours, from 10 minutes after midnight till 2:15 in the morning. The mysterious caller spoke slowly, in a voice without inflections and with a foreign accent. Without hesitation and with staggering precision he answered the questions put to him by Villagrasa. These questions dealt with the most diverse subjects: history, sciences, archaeology, various techniques, etc. The unknown speaker replied without hesitation, though he were reading the answers out of dictionary. At times Villagrasa had the impression that he was talking to an electronic brain. Villagrasa was however not the only person have long conversations with the mysterious unknown callers. Another of the correspondents from whom Villagrasa heard was to cap it all a police officer, and he too had had long conversations on the telephone with a gentleman from Ummo. The irritating thing about the whole business that the communication was always established only a one-way basis, that is to say, it was impossible to communicate with them, and one simply had rely solely on calls from them. More reports, some of the correspondents turned out to be members of Sesma's group, and it became known that they too had been receiving the mysterious mimeographed communications. Among these communications there were several dealing with following themes: the biogenetic bases of the living beings that inhabit the cosmos, 24 pages, description of the Ummo craft or Oawul Ueva Oim, 43 pages, with sketches and ilu. Societe Structor of Ummo, 8 pages. Some of these reports were of a high scientific level as f.x. The first and last of them given above. The first offend no less than an explanation of the cause of mutations by which the various species living in the cosmos are enabled to evolve. The cause of mutations is connected with a vast cosmic cycle, the dimensions or scope of which cycle are so vast that terrestrial minds have not detected it. There is also mention in the same report of a mysterious chain of 84 atoms of krypton which, located in the hypothalamus, form the link between the soma, body, and the psyche, soul. As for the report on the Ibozu UU, this offers a truly revolutionary view of space, based upon a physics that has no relation whatever to terrestrial physics. The Unamites describe our conception of space as simplistic, not corresponding at all to the true reality of the cosmos, being based on mathematical and geometrical abstractions. They describe a subatomic particle, what they call the Ibozu UU. According to the manner in which these axes of the Ibozu Iweu are orientated, we see the production of matter, energy, mass, or of any other type of radiation. Furthermore, they say that there exist in space certain folds or warps which, when the isodynamic circumstances are right, enable them to make interstellar voyages in a time that is incomprehensible for our physicists, as their craft perform a dimensional change by reversing their Ibozu UU, which permits them to take a shortcut, without following the illusory straight lines of the propagation of light. By this means they are enabled to come here in 8 or 9 months from their planet Ummo, which, according to the reports supplied by them, is in orbit around the star Iuma, located at 14.6 light-years from Earth and identified provisionally by them as the star Wolf 424 of our stellar catalogue. The professor and the box among the people who were due to have participated in the meeting of the recipients. There was a certain professor, the holder of a chair in the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Madrid. He too, like the rest, had received telephone calls from the UMMITES. To begin with, he thought that it was a joke, but when his mysterious communicant at the other end of the telephone line demonstrated that he himself was the possessor of medical knowledge that was out of the ordinary, the professor invited him to come to tea in his house despite the absurdity, as he saw it, of the other party's assertion that he came from another planet. His interlocutor declined the invitation, but said he would give him, on loan, a little piece of apparatus which would convince him. An emissary would then come, a few days later, to collect the apparatus. This emissary was to he the copyist. The university professor, who has related all these details in an anonymous letter which the copyist distributed among the rest of the recipients of the reports, did in fact receive a small package. When opened, it proved to contain a little square box, with no projecting parts, that is to say, with entirely smooth sides, of metallic appearance, and of a dull black color. On one of its facets this little box had a translucent screen which was joined to the rest of the box without any dissolution of continuity. That is to say, without any mark, as thought the union had been effected at the molecular level. The little box was accompanied by some simple instructions on its use, providing for the utterance of certain determined vowels in a fixed order, whereupon the mechanism was activated. Fearing that the instrument might explode in his hands, the professor refused to do the test in his own home, and took the little box off to site faculty laboratory at a time of the day when nobody was using the premises. Before doing so, he had borrowed from a colleague a Canon camera loaded with color film, and his colleague was asked to explain to him how to work it. Arrived at the laboratory, the professor set the little black box down on a piece of baize cloth and, holding the paper in his trembling hands, pronounced the vowels in the order indicated. Immediately the translucent screen on the little box lit up, became transparent, and the professor was able to contemplate, inside the box, a histological specimen, greatly enlarged, in color, and alive, showing a neuron. The professor filmed the device while it was in operation and then, following the instructions as they were given, he saw 2 more historical specimens appear. Then, just as he had been told, one fine day a young man with a herd turned up and stated he had been commissioned to take back the apparatus. The color film however remained in possession of the professor, whose identity it's so far been impossible for us to discover, despite our efforts. So we proceed with a further selection from the remarkable Ummo documents which were sent to selected recipients in various parts of the world by beings, allegedly extraterrestrial, who said they had journeyed from the planet Ummo to Earth, where they landed in France, at La Havie in the department of the Basses Alpes in 1950. The Ummo documents carried, as authentication, a seal marked with a thumbprint and displaying an emblem like a letter H, with curved arms and a shorter perpendicular bar bisecting the horizontal bar. In 1967, the mysterious gentleman from Ummo announced that on June 10 of that year they would send a craft to land at Santa Monica, near Madrid. The recipients of this message were 3 of their correspondents in Madrid, and they, with many others, were present to see, on the day in question, a disc-shaped craft perform evolutions over the San José de Valderas suburb of Madrid, and subsequently land briefly at Santa Monica. The craft bore a sign on its underbelly very similar to the emblem of the seal on the Ummo documents. Several photographs were taken of the UFO in flight. This event was recorded by Rafael Ferials and myself in our book Un Caso Perfectat, published, in Spanish only, in 1968, and in my article The San José de Valderas Photograph, to in FSR, Vol. 15, no 5 September to October 1969. Our views regarding relations with Earthmen. It is not possible to give you a synthesis of our present-day culture without running the risk that our ideas may seem to you to be unconvincing precisely because, in a brief resume, they lack the support of the proper argumentation set forth and developed with the requisite breadth. Our desire is to offer you a surface panoramic view of the intellectual basis of our social structure on various planes that will be familiar for you, namely the cosmophilosophicial. Religious, moral, physical. For us, who view the warp and woof of the cosmos as a harmonious whole, which cannot be split up into disciplines or science without gravely distorting the truth, this separation into such compartments as cosmophilosophical, religious, moral, and physical is of course artificial and wrong. The links between the various different aspects of the universe are so intimate that the mental projection of them into separate watertight compartments easily alienate the student. But to set these ideas of ours down and transcribe them for you really is in truth a difficult task when you bear in mind the fact that your fashion of mental portrayal is differently formed from ours. We are unable to make use of a common language intelligible to both of us. Even now, when I try to use verbal forms in Spanish that are familiar to you, I am putting a block upon the flux of ideas which could otherwise be communicated with ease, for the accepted meanings of your phonemes cannot correctly interpret my thought. In our case, it isn't only that we have to search for a Spanish word or phoneme whose meaning analogous to our own corresponding word. The position is that, even when we have managed to do this, and even when we have made a complex lexicographic analysis of your language, the expressions formed by these words of ours would still hold, concealed within them, meanings are strange to the topical habits of terrestrial thinking. For this reason the ideas offered, in this communications, to others of your brethren of different nationalities are bound to be geotropical, that is to say having a marked flavor of terrestrial cultural orientation, towards this or that area of Earth, but this it due to the vehicle of so communication selected. The evocative power of the phonemes that familiar to you hinders any serious attempt at geonosological cultural transference. What is very far indeed from our minds is idea of offering you these concepts in order that I might serve for you as a substitutional doctrinal basis in place of the present-day foundations your own extraterrestrial human thought. Communications similar to these, although with specifically different content, have been through the post to philosophers, to the hierarchies of various churches, to graduates of Vari universities, to technical experts, to publicists, to persons of average education in various countries of Oyaga, Earth. We are aware that many of your brethren rejected this material because they refused to recognize our true identity. This attitude is the orthodox one from the point of view of normal logic. But even those terrestrial Oami, men, who, prompted by curiosity, have retained these duplicated pages in various languages, and who have been to combine, in an admirable balance, the mental reserve and secrecy demanded by us plus an open attitude of acceptance of our testimony have never been under pressure from us to substitute our views for their own ideas. Ummo Expedition to Earth. By Antonio Ribera. This is the topic which Ribera made as a description on the Ummo case, in connection with the production of a half-hour video documentary on the case, subject and this manuscript. Subject was used on a radio sending in Los Angeles. Later I choose to take this in first as an introduction, because it gives a rapid general view on this UFO contact case, and a lot of details will be watched later on. Some strange Ummo words will be used here, which is also described later in the material. Some angle words are translated to Norwegian in the film, Videomanus. 1. Opening scene on the video production. Antonio Ribera. I am Antonio Ribera of Barcelona, UFO investigator and writer on this exotic subject. About 30 years ago I began investigating the fascinating enigma of the unidentified flying objects, commonly called UFOs, which during this entire time and perhaps for long before have been observed in the atmosphere of Earth, including landing on the surface of our planet. In these long years of study I have come to the conclusion that the UFOs are in fact supermachines based on a technology superior to that of Earth, and that their origin is without doubt extraterrestrial. Since the year 1965 a small group of Spaniards began to receive mysterious telephone calls of long duration, some lasting more than an hour, followed in many cases by dispatch by mail of intriguing mechanically reproduced information monographs. These papers discussed diverse scientific themes and were distinguished by their high level of information and their rigorously expositive tone. The well-informed telephone callers as well as the authors of the papers called themselves extraterrestrials, and said that they came from a planet they called Ummo, which in turn orbits a star they called Iuma, provisionally identified by them as that we identify as Wolf 424 in our astronomy catalogues, and situated some 14 light-years from Earth. In 1967 I, for the first time, came into contact with the Ummo enigma. Consequently I began informing myself on the various papers and communications from the Ummos, and I began to receive communications directly from them myself subsequent to that time and became one of their contactees. These papers were submitted to various nation scientists as well as some foreigners for study. The reaction of the scientists was surprise at the high level of information in the texts. Some of the papers offered ideas truly revolutionary concerning cosmology and biology, for example. According to the authors of some of these papers, they were human in appearance, tall and light-completed, such that they could pass unrecognized among us, adopting identities as citizens of the Nordic countries. Because of this and much more, the Ummo contact is one of the greatest enigmas of the UFO phenomenon. Are they from a secret society? Are they a test of credibility launched by NASA, for example, to study the reaction of Earthmen confronted by the presence of a supposed extraterrestrial race? Is it a CIA maneuver to deprestigize the subject of UFOs? Or are the Ummo beings authentic extraterrestrial as they affirm? They say, in effect, that they arrived on Earth in 1950, in 3 disc-shaped spacecraft which landed in the French department called Basses Alpes, Lower Alps. But wouldn't it be more interesting if they told us themselves? Pictures, images from Ummo. Remember this Manus was made as a half-hour video documentary on the case, showing special effects to produce the images of traveling space rapidly, until we finally arrive at a water planet covered by white clouds and blue sea on which floats a single large continent. Coming closer until it occupies the whole scene. The camera descends to the surface of the planet until a scene appears of one of the gigantic constructions in the vertical style of Ummo. We pass to the interior where we see a great control room and close in on the image of a single personality whose face ends up occupying the whole screen. This personality says, "I am Day 98, son of Day 97. I shall explain how our world of Ummo came into contact with a sister world called by its inhabitants Earth, a planet which we call Oyaga. We are in the same control room where some years ago our technicians recorded a message from cosmic space which was not natural. We knew it was not a part of the natural noise of the galaxy. We received it in a frequency you call the 21 cm band, that of natural hydrogen. It was a radioelectric message in code and its origin was undoubtedly intelligent. Our technicians went to work and soon located the source of the emissions. It was your planet, Earth, a cold star of this quadrant for reasons which we will not now explain. With emotion we understood this to be a message of great importance. It was intelligent, a succession of dots and dashes that, as we later came to understand, corresponded to the emissions in your Hertzian waves that in Earth year 1934 was launched into space by a Norwegian ship that was testing the wave reflection of the ionosphere of your planet. A train of waves penetrated the ether of space and was lost. 14 years later arrived at Ummo and was recorded. Our planet is precisely that distance, 14 light-years, from Earth, and the radio waves traveled the speed of light. We then decided to organize our first INAYUISAA, also a Ummo word, some of them will be used further also, or expedition to the mysterious planet from which came the waves. Our advanced technology permitted us to traverse the great distance of 14 light-years a few months by a method of conversion of the Ibozu UU, or subatomic particles of our great spaceships which pass them into hyperspace or another dimensional frame of reference, leaving their normal dimension of being. 9 months after departing Ummo was produced the Oawol EAIDA, or materialization instantaneously of our ship in a preselected place above your Earth. 3. Scene changes to night in the French Alps. The peaceful scene is suddenly illuminated with a strange orangish light, and the ship from Ummo materializes in a ball of yellow-orange light with traces of a greenish luminous corona, and remains suspended a few meters above the ground as a tripod landing gear is extended for landing and it slowly settles onto the surface. In a few seconds, as the luminosity fades, a door opens in the side and the first Ummites jump to the ground dressed in dark form-fitting suits. They are tall and light completed and among them are 2 women. Altogether there are 2 women and 6 men in this landing party. They begin to inspect their surroundings. They are at the foot of the Cheval Blanc Peak. The leader of the mission is Oyoi 95, son of Oyoi 91. A telepathic dialogue takes place. Woman, our leader Oyoi 95 has something to say. Oyoi 95, our telemetric apparatus is not mistaken. This planet could be a twin of Ummo, similar mass, similar diameter, similar atmospheric composition, though the biological explosion here seems more important. There are more species, both animal and vegetable, than on our planet at home. He advances several paces and examines in turn and recognizes the features of some plants. Oyoi 95 bring the atomic disintegrators from the ship and we will excavate a provisional shelter. 4 seen already in the interior of the excavated refuge. The ship that brought them is parked in a hiding place near the top of Cheval Blanc Pew, invisible to sight. It is day and the expeditionaries leave their excavated shelter with prudence. They advance slowly and cautiously along the slope of the mountain, studying everything with great curiosity, until they arrive at a meadow where cows are grazing. Oyoi 95 and his companions contemplate with stupefaction the ruminants, animals completely unknown to them. Soon from beyond a rock comes an Earth boy about 11 years old, the shepherd who has been tending the herd of cows. Surprised, he looks at the strange Ummites, making a visor with his hands to see better in the bright sunlight. The expeditionaries imitate the gesture thinking it is some form of greeting, much surprised in their turn. The encounter is repeated within the next few days. The boy takes the extraterrestrials as simply strangers, and when they ask him to say the names of various objects that they have indicated, the herdsman is enchanted to become their teacher. In this way they learn the first rudiments of the French language of Earth. One day they brought the boy a page of newspaper that they had encountered, and he read it to them with some difficulty. The affairs were such that Oyo 95 decided to send the 3 ships of the expeditionary force back to Ummo. The ships rose majestically into the night sky and disappeared, passing into another dimension. The expeditionary team remained on Earth free to pursue their own opportunities. 5-night scene of migrant workers' dormitory, Sovasal. Night expeditionary enter the dormitory while all the workers are asleep and obtain samples of terrestrial objects and things for examination in their laboratory in the cave they have excavated. They had selected La Défense in Tartuan, near La Havie. 24 years later, the Gendarmeria confirmed to Dr. Claude Poer and Antonio Ribera that in that place there had been a robbery on the date indicated, and that the thieves had taken, among other things indicated in the communication from the Ummites later, an electrical computer, and bar soap, which they took for food, electric light bulbs, clothes, shoes and other domestic things including a wig and organic cosmetics of the sleepers. When the police later tried to locate the robbery victims who had been living in Tartuan at the time, they were found living in the surroundings of Cannes, on the Costa Azul, in homes denoting positions economic substance. The Ummites had promised to indemnify, or stat, them well for their losses. Oyo 95 then sent 2 of his brothers to the neighboring country, Spain, traveling to Iran under identification of Danish doctors. 6. The scene shifts now to Albacete, Spain, where in 1952 2 mysterious Danish doctors introduced themselves to Dona Margarita Ruiz Lijori, a leading woman of Spanish aristocracy. Dona Margarita owned a big house at number 50 Calle Major, where she kept a large number animals, dogs, cats, parrots, etc. The 2 Danish doctors gained her confidence and she consented to let them stay in the house, living there for the time being, where they performed vivisection experiments on some of the animals. They convinced her that they could cure some grave psychosomatic disorders that the Marquesa de Villasante Suf Fair, the title of Dona Margarita. Shortly after this there developed a macabre episode concerning the daughter of the Marquesa, Margarita Shelley. Affected by leucemia, they later understood, things worsened considerably, and she died short time later. The body was taken to Madrid by the 2 Danish doctors almost immediately. This then became the episode of the severed hand. In effect, at the death of the daughter, the doctors amputated the right hand and removed the ocular globes sometime during the trip to Madrid. The other children of the Marquesa accused her of a monstrous profanation, and took their mother to court, accusing her of practicing magic and witchcraft. However, it was not her, but the Ummites who were trying to isolate what they thought was an extraterrestrial virus that might have escaped control. An Ummite virus perhaps, about which they did not know what effects it might have on Earth human beings. Later they could see that it was incurable by him who was experimenting at the large house in Albacete. They determined that the infection had settled in the right palm and behind the eyeballs, and while taking the body of the young lady to Madrid they performed an expedited procedure to section the hand, and to extirpate the eyes. This event plus other complications that came up at Albacete, obliged the Ummites to terminate their project to study the superior vertebrates of Earth for which 3 members of the INAYUISAA to France had entered Spain through Iran with passports from Nordic countries. We should say in passing that Interpol asked the North American CIA to begin an active search for several tall light-completed men that may be traveling on Swedish passports, or perhaps even Danish or Norwegian, who spoke with difficulty and who carried an apparatus in the throat. They began to assemble dossiers on these strange visitors in the offices of Interpol, of the Duxim Bureau, and in the security services around the world. A few years later, when the Ummites had already brought some 15 additional members studying Earth civilization, 2 other, Danish doctors, presented themselves one fine day at the home of a professional secretary and mechanical copier in Madrid who had advertised in the local paper an advertisement saying, "We make mechanical copies." 7 scene shifts, remember this was the film Manus, to the home of a public stenographer in Madrid. These 2 doctors, later it was believed that one of them was Dei 98. after making arrangements to dictate material to be typed up by the copyist and then be prepared in various copies to be mailed to specific addresses furnished, began to dictate high-level scientific papers to the typist, who would transcribe and reproduce them as instructed. The public secretary could not contain his surprise one day when Day 98, the name they used on one of the Ummots, dictated the following phrase: "We come from the cold star Ummo, which can be found 14.6 light-years from Earth." Perceiving his surprise, Day 98 took from his pocket a small dark sphere that floated in the air as it activated in itself a picture, and the stupefied secretary could see himself and his wife, on the previous day, arguing heatedly. His wife said, "Look, even though these men pay you well, I think they might be spies. Don't you think you should call the police?" Begging pardon with the exquisite courtesy, Hoflaget, of the Ummites for this intrusion on his intimate family, Day 98 said, "I believe that now you will have no doubt about our identity." The information that the secretary had was to be dictated by the visitor. The Ummites could not make the papers because, among the several anatomical differences from Earthmen, is an excessive sensitivity in the tips of the fingers due to having 36 nerve terminations in the which make simple things like writing very painful for the Ummites, as well as typing or pushing a button on an elevator, which in the last case they do with their knuckles. These papers were sent to some score Spanish citizens, which represented a cross-section of the population and also represented almost all of the professions: doctors, a cartoonist, the late Alfonso Paso, a police commissioner, a couple of engineers, and specialized writers on extraterrestrial themes, among whom is Antonio Ribera and Professor Fernando Sesma, who did not delay in publishing the first book on this case titled, Ummo, Another Inhabited Planet, in which he described the papers that had been received. Because Sesma received most of the early paper from the Ummites, a false impression that this was all the work of Professor Fernand Sesma Manzano developed. 8 Scene shift to one of the Spanish scientists in his office on the telephone, where he has received a telephone call from an Ummite man. The reception of the zero-copied manuscripts was often preceded by a series of mysterious telephone calls in a monotone voice without inflection inviting questions on distinct scientific themes. The telephone e-phone calls were long-winded, often lasting more than a half-hour. The callers identified themselves as a visitor to Earth from the planet Ummo. According to civil construction engineer Eric Villagrasa, who was one of the first contacted, the voices sounded like they came from a computer, because of the incredible precision of response to questions I asked. These conversations often ended with invitation to the person called to request information on a theme special interest to him. In a few days he would receive the information requested in the form of a copied monograph, sometimes accompanied by surprising drawings, tables, graphs, and even photographs and microfilm images, especially prepared for the report, and addressed and mailed to them in ordinary mail. They were always authenticated by a curious seal stamped on the margin of the message. 9 Scene change, on the video, to engineer Enrique Villagrasa describing his conversation about the Ummo spacecraft and subsequent receipt of the report already described in the earlier pages of this book. Villagrasa exhibits and describes the documents and information received, showing the extreme complexity of the Ummo spaceships. 10 Scene on the video shift to the offices of Dr. Professor of Histology at the University of Madrid, who has also received a call from one of the Ummite visitors. Believing the call to be a joke by one of his students, he began to hang up when the anonymous caller invited him to ask questions about his particular specialty. So scientific and precise were the responses, that the professor was amazed, but he asked a question of his caller. "You shall have your answer. Tomorrow I will send it to you," was the reply. As with Villagrasa, the answer came almost immediately, seemingly from a computer, as there seemed no time for preparation of answers to questions asked spontaneously by the Earth recipient of the call. In this case, on the following day a young bearded man arrived at the house of the professor. It was the public secretary, carrying a package, which he delivered to the professor. Opening it, the doctor saw that it contained a dark rectangular box with rounded corners. Accompanying it, was a note with instructions. To activate it, the note said, he trust pronounce a series of vocal tones in a certain order. The professor took the box to his laboratory at the university, since it was a holiday and there was nobody around. He set the box on a bench on top of a protective cloth in the demonstration room and carefully pronounced the notes. He had brought a borrowed 35mm Canon camera with him to film any results. A part of the box illuminated at the effect of his voice, forming a small viewing screen that didn't seem to have any end to continuity with the rest of the box. No separation or break between the screen and the finish of the box. In the view appeared a live neuron. Then pronouncing other vocals indicated, the neuron disappeared and another historical view was presented, also alive, on the profound questions asked over the telephone, something that is absolutely impossible for our science to do. The following day the bearded man reappeared to pick up the extraordinary box. The public secretary then proposed, in a discussion with the professor, to arrange a reunion of all the recipients, Mottager, of the Ummo papers, to see if they shouldn't eventually bring the affair to the knowledge of the Spanish authorities. But the Ummites were aware of the conversation and expressed violent verbal disapproval, Mistro. It is the only time that I have seen them truly angry, wrote the secretary to the net of Ummo correspondence. After all this, the INAYUYISAA expeditionary team, having succeeded in opening the contacts with Earth, departed. Other expeditionary groups with different specialists came and were in turn relieved by still others. The marvelous Ummo ships traveled the WAM, cosmos, utilizing the folds of space and by means of the OWAOLEIDA or inversion of their Ibozu UU, supermicroparticle, passed into other dimensional frame of reference, such as the UWAM or the anti-cosmos. Traveling in this way, outside of normal space, they were able to come from Ummo to Earth, or return, in only 8 to 9 months. 11. Scene shift to various scientists commenting on the Ummo phenomenon. Because of the high level of information presented, eminent scientists in Spain began to take notice, and also in other countries as well. In France, physicists and astrophysicists saw a new and revolutionary concept to the universe and in the knowledge of the Ibozu UU, supermicroparticle, and biologists were amazed by the biogenetic bases of the being that populate the WAM, received by Alicia Araujo, now deceased, of Madrid, which explained nothing less than the cause of genetic mutations produced by unknown cosmic radiations of great temporal magnitude. 12. The Ummites bring in sophisticated equipment that allows them to simultaneously monitor all media, radio and television emanations, and they study our political and geopolitical situation worldwide. They detect the rapid escalation of weapons and atomic potential and a deteriorating world social situation that raises their probability estimates of the inevitability of an atomic exchange to an alarmingly high %. They decide to evacuate all their people from Earth and arrange for evacuation ships from Ummo. 13. The scene shifts back to the public stenographer's house and meeting there to include the typist's wife. Day 98, the name they used on one of the Ummotes, and another man arrive and discuss the assembly of one group of Ummites in Madrid for pickup by an evacuation ship. Arrangements are made with the typist and his wife for some of the Ummites to stay in their house when they get to Madrid to await the pickup. The neighborhood area is inspected and area surveillance equipment deployed to assure their security while there. The leader of the expeditionary group arrives from Australia and is introduced to the typist and his wife. Dinner is served to the Ummo guests that night and a conversation follows. Then preparations for sleeping are made, and they all turn in. Further preparations for the departure of the group are made the next day, and another night is spent in the secretary's home. Thus developed the conditions that resulted in the observation at San José de Valderas, by dozens of Madrid-enos taking the air at a picnic ground outside the city in the late afternoon of June 1967. 14. Scene changes to the picnic ground at San José de Valderas, near Santa Monica, where many picnickers are trying to escape the heat of that day in the late afternoon shade. Suddenly the groups of people are stirred by the approach of a strange circular aircraft of completely unknown disc-shaped design. It is huge, some 70 feet in diameter, and displays a large peculiar emblem on the lower surface of the ship. The symbol is like a stylized H, with curved arms and another vertical bar in the middle, more specifically, plus. Two separate spectators in the crowd have cameras and begin shooting pictures. Others scramble for their cameras, and more are believed to have been taken as the object passed fairly close, in full view of everyone on the park. The large ship made an approaching curve toward the witnesses and then curved away again and descended and apparently landed beyond some trees obscuring the further view. Then a few moments later it took off again and flew away. The big ship had landed on the Santa Monica Convent grounds, where the witnesses found tripod landing marks pressed into the ground. They also discovered some mysterious metal objects of small size, like the ones deployed in the neighborhood of the typist's house the night the Ummites stayed there. These may have been some kind of area surveillance sonda. At least 2 sets of black and white photographs have been identified with that sighting. The 2 photographers were in different group locations, unacquainted with each other, using different cameras, with different rolls of film, slightly different exposures, with different film processing in different locations and unknown to each other. One of these sets of pictures came to attention when the photographer took it to be developed, and pictures of the ship were published in the newspaper the following day. The second photographer, seeing the pictures in the paper, got in touch with researchers anonymously and gave them 2 of his photographs. None of the other photographers ever came to attention if they got pictures too. This event is reported in great detail in the book The Perfect Case by Antonio Ribera and Rafael Ferrials. 15. The scene shifts again to the Café Leon near San Jose de Valderas, where Professor Fernando Sesma Manzano is meeting with some 30 friends and acquaintances who had been advised by letter in advance and were aware that the Ummo pickup was going to be made, and were there to witness it. Unfortunately for them, the landing took place a few kilometers away at the picnic area, and they missed the event until spectators arrived at the restaurant excitedly describing the event. 36 persons present with Sesma sign the back of his copy the letter from the Ummites advising him of the anticipated pickup, which they had calculated would take place near the zone of Boadilla del Monte, nearby, though they didn't know exactly where. 16. The face of Antonio Ribera comes on screen again as he explains that the Ummo visitors had watched the development of the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, and knew of the commitments by each political faction and what actions were being prepared. Their calculated probability of atomic war beginning to escalate in the last days of May as they observed the rapid development of events, and the evacuation ships were hastily called in. Only the sudden and catastrophic change of events on the 5th of June, just 4 days later, the preemptive 6-day war, changed the course of planning and the outcome. The Ummos returned when the danger was reduced and resumed their studies of Earth. In 1973 the danger grew to unacceptable probabilities again, and once more they evacuated all Ummites from this planet. This time they went home, and they were gone for 4 years before they resumed their studies on a reduced scale. 17. The camera slowly zooms in closer as Ribera explains that these visitors have taken most of their specialists home, advising that their ethics prohibit them from giving us anything. Their advanced technologies would be of no benefit to us because we are not ready to use them wisely. We would turn them to war potentials, and we would be worse off than before. All efforts at personal communications have now failed, one reason for now releasing this information. Perhaps this presentation will serve in some way, finally, for them. Perhaps we can still learn. 18. A new scene with Ribera as he explains that in 1980, as he was struggling with an ending for this presentation, the Ummos themselves contacted him again and offered a close for the documentary presentation you will now see. 19. The face of Day 98 fills the screen as he says, "For 30 years we have studied your science, your culture, history and civilizations. All this information we have carried from your Earth to Ummo in our titanium crystals codified with data. We have demonstrated to you our culture and our technology in purely descriptive form so you cannot convert them or realize them practically. We have done this because we note with sadness that you employ your sciences primarily for war and the destruction of your own selves, which Kant.as your principal, Wichtigste, objective. You are like children playing with terrible and dangerous toys which will destroy you. We can do nothing. A cosmic law says that each world must take its own path, to survive or to perish. You have chosen the second. You are destroying your planet, annihilating your species, and contaminating, Foreornser, your atmosphere and your seas until now. This is irreversible. With sadness we contemplate your insanity, and understand that the remedy is only in yourselves. We cannot look forward a great distance into your future because your psyche are completely unpredictable and capricious, Loonfault, bordering on paranoia. As your elder brothers in this cosmos, we urgently desire with all our hearts your salvation. Do not destroy your beautiful blue planet, a rare atmospheric world that floats so majestically in space, so full of life. It is your choice. This was the message read over KABC Radio Open Mind in mid-November 1982 when the station was flooded with calls and letters asking for a copy of the message. Some of the callers were crying. On the 29th of January 1983 it was read again by John Erickson, co-star of the excellent UFO science fiction movie, Bamboo Saucer, and again the effect was spectacular. There were hundreds of letters and calls again and many requests for a repeat, so many that for the next 2 weeks Bill Jenkins closed his show with Erickson's reading of the message as listeners all over Los Angeles recorded copies of it.